Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, as always, to Marita Coombs, who is now the librarian at the beautiful Malden Public Library, and without whom these monthly sessions just wouldn't be possible, and they certainly wouldn't be as much fun. Um, so this is very special today. And I know that David Ferry's birthday is tomorrow, and I wanted to choose one of my countless favorite poems by David to talk about with you. And this is one that I've gone back to many times. I think it's a great poem, a profound poem, a very moving poem. And I'm so grateful to David for this poem and for countless others. So can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's start. I'm going to read the poem, and then we'll talk about it. It's called That Evening at Dinner. By the last few times we saw her, it was clear that things were different. When you tried to help her get out of the car, or get from the car to the door, or across the apartment house hall to the elevator, there was a new sense of heaviness or of inertia in the body. It wasn't that she was less willing to be helped to walk, but that the walking itself had become less willing. Maybe the stupid demogorgon, blind recalcitrance of body, resentful of the laws of mind and spirit, was getting its own back now. Or maybe a new and subtle alien intelligence of body was obedient now to other laws. Quote, weight is the measure of the force with which a body is drawn downward to the center of the earth. Inertia is the tendency of a body to resist proceeding to its fate in any way other than that determined for itself. That evening at the Brammel's apartment, after she had been carried up through the rational structure by articulate stages, floor after flashing floor, and after we helped her get across the hall and get across the room to a chair, somehow we got her seated in a chair that was placed a little too far from the nearest table, at the edge of the abyss. And there she sat, exposed, her body the object of our attention, the heaviness of it, the helpless, graceless leg, the thick stocking, the leg brace, the medical shoe. A work between herself and us, there was a new principle of at work between herself and us, there was a new principle of social awkwardness and skillfulness required of each of us. Our tones of voice in this easy conversation were instruments of marvelous finesse, measuring and maintaining with exactitude the fact or condition of the difference there was between us, both in space and time. Her smiling made her look as if she had just then tasted something delicious. The charm her courtesy attributed to her friends. This decent, elegant fellow human being was seated in virtue, character, disability, behind the order of the ranged bookshelves, the windows monitored by Venetian blinds. These can be raised or lowered, numerous slats horizontally arranged and parallel, which can be tilted so as to admit precisely the desired light or air. We were all her friends, Maggie and Bill and Anne and I, and the nice Boston Brahmin elderly man named Duncan, utterly friendly and benign. And of course, it wasn't whether or not the world was benign, but whether it looked at her too much. She wasn't painfully shy, but just the same, I wouldn't be surprised if there had been painfulness in her shyness earlier on, say at dancing school. Like others, though, she had survived her childhood somehow, nor do I mean she was unhappy, maybe more or less so before her marriage. One had the sense of trips arranged, committees, concerts, baffled courage, living it through, giving it order and style. And one had the sense of the late marriage as of two bafflements inventing the sense they made together. The marriage seemed to the outside world, and probably was, radiant and triumphant. And I think that one could almost say that during the last heroic phase of things, after his death and after the stroke, she had, by force of character and careful management, maintained a certain degree of happiness. The books there on the bookshelves told their stories, line after line, all of them evenly spaced, and spaces between the words. You could fall through the spaces. In one of the books, Dr. Johnson told the story. In the scale of being, wherever it begins or ends, there are chasms infinitely deep, infinite vacuities. For surely nothing can so disturb the passions or perplex the intellects of man so much as the disruption of this union with visible nature. Separation from all that has delighted or engaged him. A change not only of the place, but of the manner of his being. An entrance into a state not simply which he knows not, but perhaps a state he has not faculties to know. The dinner was delicious. Fresh greens and reds and yellows, produce of the season dew, and fish from the nearby sea. And there were also ashes to be eaten and dirt to drink.
Mm.
Um, Bravo, David. What, I don't know, what's your experience of reading this poem? It's a longish poem. It
Lloyd?
takes, yes.
This poem is as clinical as an autopsy.
How do you mean?
Oh, it just absolutely describes and presents all of the intellectual and emotional components of what's going on. And even in one of the stanzas, there's a reference to the instruments that are used to consider the situation. And so that really does become a metaphor of how this is presented. And I mean that in an absolutely awe-inspiring way. I mean, it's high praise. It's really an absolutely fabulous, fabulous poem. I mean, I think of Rembrandt's painting of the dissection of Dr. Tulp. And, it's a beautiful, I mean, it's a sort of grisly situation, but it's absolutely beautiful, the painting. And this is very much like that Rembrandt painting, I think.
Thank you. Jackie, did you have your hand up? No. Okay. Any other reactions, any other thoughts about your Cami? Yeah, unmute. Yeah.
Hi, David, and happy birthday. It's Cami. Don't know if you can hear me, but the thing that is so astonishing to me about this poem is the navigation between the physical world and the world of feelings and ideas, the world of the mind and the spirit. And I feel that what is so moving to me is the way that, for example, the books are physical objects on the shelf with spaces between them and also with chasms, and that you fall into them and you fall into the words of them. And so you are always, as a human being, in this navigation between the physical, the discomforts thereof, especially as you get older, and the luminescent light of the mind. And this poem, and of the spirit of the heart, this poem just stays on that knife edge the whole time. It really begins with the signs of the stroke, the awkward body that is so awkward for everyone. But the incredible subtlety and brilliance of this person, the spirit that's sitting there. So for me, that's the astonishing thing, is staying on that edge between the two.
Yeah. Gary? Yeah.
1 second, my father would like to say something. Go ahead.
Oh, please.
I'm so grateful for your reading of the poem, and your reading not only in the dignity and emotion in the reading itself, but in the way the reading itself is interpreting for itself the meaning of what it's hearing. And it's thrilling to me to hear it presented in a way so sympathetic to what my intentions were and are. Thank you so much.
I had a great role model as a reader, because I can hear you reading this poem and remember so vividly your reading of this poem and how profoundly moved I was. Probably before I read the poem on the page, I heard you read it, and how moved I was by that. But thank you. Bill. Oh, what were you? Did you have your?
Sorry, Lloyd, I didn't really, but I can chime in now if you'd like.
Sure.
Picking up on Cami's point, I also have about the relationship between the body and the spirit or intelligence. It also seemed to me that the way in which physical subjects were hooked up with mental verbs, and I think possibly vice versa, had the effect of giving the impression that our received language relating to mind and body and our received approaches to the mind-body problem were somehow felt to be inadequate. It was almost as if the strangeness of the formulations here with regard to those two entities were designed to somehow imply that our regular way of talking about human behavior and our way of demarcating the difference between mind and body and allotting portions to each somehow fall short of adequacy in relation to the description of someone's behavior. So early on we get, it wasn't that she was less willing to be helped to walk, but that the walking itself had become less willing. So now we've got walking as capable of governing a verb, which we think of as mental, being willing to do something. And that kind of confusion of the division between mind and body, the physical and the mental, persists throughout the poem. It's almost sort of deconstructive, isn't it? Almost as if we have a dualism set up between mind and body, but in a sort of faintly Derridian way. Elements which we assume belong to one polarity migrate across the spectrum between them and attach themselves to the other polarity. So that the poem thus becomes not just a remarkably astute and fine response to a particular evening's events and the way in which people try to behave with civility towards someone suffering from a disability, but it becomes almost an interrogation of the whole mind-body problem.
Yeah, which I think you raise the issue of the title as an introduction to the poem, and any kind of what are your feelings about the title? To me, the title is so perfect, but that it's also surprising in a number of ways. Any thoughts about the title?
I think Gary is.
Oh, Gary, sure.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, it's Gary here, and I just want to say happy birthday to you, David, one day ahead of time. It's thrilling to be here with all of you and hearing Lloyd read your poem. So a wonderful poem. And about the title, your question about the title, what just occurred to me is in line with what Bill and Cami were saying, the title names something so obvious and specific and explicit that we get invited to consider that. And then what the title doesn't name starts to emerge in the specific details of the physical and the emotional, the mind and the body, as you were saying, Bill, and that engagement between the mind and the body with all those specifics. And then we get that quote from Johnson toward the end, which I think it really speaks to something that this poem celebrates, which is the integrity of not knowing, where he says, there's this, for surely nothing can so disturb the passions or perplex the intellects of man so much as the disruption of this union with visible nature. So all those specifics are what we can see and experience. And then the feelings that emerge, we can see and experience. But then the quote goes on and says that there is this entrance into a state, not simply which he knows not, but perhaps a state he has not faculties to know. And that's where it feels like there's this celebration of the not knowing along with all that we can know. And that, Cami, I think you used the image of a knife edge that the poem stays on. It feels to me like part of that knife edge is that edge between our knowing and our not knowing. And that evening at dinner, we can see the books with the spaces between them. We can see all these things. And then there's so much we can't see that gets evoked. The poem enacts the not knowing in such a beautiful and powerful way. So uh, and then it lands in that last stanza with just these very specifics, but that last line just shoots off into another dimension of some kind of knowing that is not linear, like ashes to be eaten and dirt to drink, like such a gorgeous recognition of our not knowing and the disruption in our experience that we can live with, is what the poem declares. I think we can live with this, even though it's so challenging. So I'm loving the poem, and I love hearing you read it, Lloyd. And so many thanks to David for the poem and to all of you for this. It's wonderful.
Yeah, oh, Jennifer, sure.
I just wanted to follow in agreement with all these things, including the happy day early birthday to David, and say one more thing about what I find moving in reading the poem and hearing the poem read, which I think pertains to everything that's been said. I think maybe Cami used the word navigating between different things. And on the one hand, I do feel there's a kind of scrupulous, almost cynical navigation, to take Stephen's autopsy terms. But I also feel the way we move back and forth between the language of the poem seeming calm, and then when it gets angry, or when a shift feels violent. So what I mean is that first part that Bill read, that ends.
You just clicked on your sound.
Sorry. That section Bill read that ends with the wonderful, strange notion that she was less willing to be helped to walk, but that the walking itself had become less willing. All the language up to that point is plain as water, and deliberating in a kind of slow, scrupulous way. But then the next line, maybe the stupid demogorgon blind recalcitrance of the body, it comes in with that piling on of adjectives, as if, okay, we've done what we could do with the slow, deliberate telling, and now it just makes me angry that I can't get at it. And those shifts that I find moving from a kind of very plain style with almost no adjectives to then a kind of pile up, or a different kind of pile up, like this decent, elegant fellow human being was seated in virtue, character, disability, as if that's opposed to the stupid demogorgon blind recalcitrance of the body. So I experience the poem as a kind of a ride that goes evenly and carefully and then has these jolts. And the end of the poem for me is a particularly devastating jolt, that ashes to be eaten and dirt to drink. And it hits me differently each time, but for me, I feel like it's a mix of a kind of bleak, well, it's the empty spaces between people, necessarily socially, from the not knowing that's been described, and also the emptiness within oneself. And these are just abysses to live alongside and sometimes be aware of and sometimes not. But I just think the end of the poem is so gorgeous in the collision of the delicious and then the ashes. So
I just wanted to add one thing. Catherine,
No, you read. You read.
I just wanted to add. I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned the phrase the fellow human being, and what is underlying everything in this poem is that this person who has had this complicated and emotional and physical life, we're not very different from her. We're all implicated in that, and that the author, the poet, is implicated in that, and that he doesn't, there's never any kind of, I mean, there are consistent judgments and insights all the way through the poem, but that what's underlying everything is his ability to identify with everyone in this situation, both the guest at the dinner and all the other guests and all the other visitors. Catherine?
Yes, I think there is such a jolt, as Jennifer put it, and as you were saying about the locating the subjectivity of different people. In the next stanza, we got her seated in a chair that was placed a little too far away from the nearest table, and then at the edge of the abyss. So that jolts you from, yes, to the bystanders, it's a little too, but to her with this disability, it's an abyss. And then it just goes on, and there she sat, and now we're observers again of a person who's not us. But for that phrase, at the edge of the abyss, we are her, she is us.
It just occurs to me that everyone at this dinner party is named except the subject at the center of the poem. Mary?
There.
Yeah. Hold on one second. Sorry, go ahead,
What do
Doug.
you say?
I'm saying you should go ahead.
I'm trying to, there's the title of the poem, I think, is to be thought about, and it's related to everything that you all have been eloquently saying. That evening at dinner suggests that he's remembering a time which was meaningful in that way, and that he, but it refers to other poems and so on which speak of the abyss between people and so on, that's always there to some degree, and that refers to Dr. Johnson and his view of the space between us, between you and me, between you and each other. And the title suggests that the reader is already familiar with what the poem is going to do. That evening suggests that the reader had been there before, that evening at dinner, and so on. Although it also means only he remembers, this particular incident. But the title is alive with those speculations.
Yes. Yeah. I don't want to forget bringing up the issue of the genre of this poem, what kind of poem this is, and the form, and I don't want to. I'm trying not to ask a leading question, but what category of what poetic category do you see this? What poetic tradition do you see this poem as part of and contributing to? Karen, hi, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Lloyd. This is my first time here, and
Welcome.
your reading of the poem was magnificent.
Oh boy.
It slowed me down. I appreciate that. And listening to everybody's comments has helped me to appreciate the poem. I will answer your question rightly or wrongly, and then I have an issue that I don't think people have addressed somehow in slant ways, but not directly.
Oh,
I think
good.
it is a poem like an ode of a celebratory occasion that has a real twist on it. That dinner, it's a celebration of old friends getting together. They are used to doing it because it's that evening. There's been a lot of other evenings. The powerful interrogation of the body is incredible. And by the end of that, I am left in a really different space than the one when I came. So I'm not expecting how far after the quotation, after the sense that there is the praise of the almost inability to know. We're moving into that place that I read about something completely different. I read Kurtzy's essay on Rilke on the Ninth Elegy, which is a long time ago, the South African, white South African writer, Kurtzy. And he said that Rilke has reached a point where his intuition has taken him so far, he really can no longer grasp what he somehow is intuiting. He's reached that point. And I had that feeling at the place of we come to a place of unknowing. Then the word delicious felt violative to me. I did not know how to interpret it. Is this sarcasm? I don't think so from how other people are reading this poem. They seem to not find it the way I found it, like, what? No, what are you doing, poet? What are you doing? You have taken me to a very different place. And delicious, is this a banality? Is this wanting suddenly to reaffirm the body's urgencies? We need to eat, however disabled we are, or however we are on the way to our deaths. And the last line to me is all about death. Eating ashes. I mean, it's all of our ashes. So yes, the commonality in this is certainly struck at the end. But I have a question. How do other people, am I the only person who felt that, what is he doing with a descriptive adjective like delicious? What's the tone on that? Where is he going from the unknowing to the delicious? And is that too much of the kind of jolts that Jennifer was talking about and other people are assenting to? I would welcome someone else's feelings and opinions and reactions to that.
Okay, I see Mary, Ruth, and Stephen in that order. I may have gotten it wrong, but Mary, start with you, and then Ruth.
Yeah, well, I just love this morning is incredible. And I just want to say thank you, David, and thank you, Lloyd. It's just amazing to be here. And I've been picking up on God, I hate academic jargon, and one word I can't stand using is objectification.
With you.
It's one of those words. But I'm kind of picking up on the brutality, the violence, I think was the word she used, and the Cammie's knife edge. So I wanted to say, one of the things that struck me was also the sense of the brutality of the objectification, if I can actually say that which sounds so abstract and yucky, but I noticed like one of the passages that really struck me was David's use of get. after we helped her get across the hall and get across the room and somehow got her seated in the chair. And then the chair is a little too far away from the table. Like there's such incredible, yeah, it is in a way, I guess you could use the word violent. Also in the fact that she's not named, and she's a mystery, even though the speaker is able to show us her experience in this miraculously poignant and deeply felt way. So I feel a sense of that kind of violence happening. And I love the way that the poem forces us to be culpable in it, as well as the people being described. And yet at the same time, it's redemptive. It's just a mind-boggling feat, really. What it conveys is so incredible. So that infinite chasm.
For me, the concluding lines also recall Gilgamesh and other poems about royalty, in a sense, for the dead person. The dinner was delicious. I hate the word irony, but there's something like that in it. For kings, we feed them delicious dinners. And that is even more of an intelligence said to them that they are going to die, that the humiliation of the body of the hero in Gilgamesh, in a sense, is a case in point, and I think it's recalled by my poem.
Oh, just to point out really quickly, and I love that deepening that you just gave it, David, but to get back to Karen's delicious, don't forget that she has something delicious that we don't quite understand. Her smiling made her look as if, right? Oh, the slippery as ifs are wonderful. There's so many of those. She had just tasted something delicious. So there's a kind of doubling of delicious too. Anyway, I'm too excited. I'm going to be quiet.
Okay, Ruth, you're next.
Well, thank you, David, for your discussion of those last few lines. I think I didn't experience the delicious at the end as brutally as Karen did, because I think that human beings, even in the worst of circumstances, can respond to food, to the pleasure of food. And I mean, we have funerals and then we go home and we eat together, and that's part of the ceremony. But to me, it was just that moment when you turn to the immediate pleasure, and it also certainly heightens the impact. I mean, that turning away from the whole of what's happened before to this immediate sensual pleasure, then heightens the impact of that final line greatly, I think.
Stephen, you're next.
Oh, am I muted? No.
No, you're not. You're okay.
A couple of things, and I do want to respond to Karen's catching on that word, because it was crucial when I read the poem as well, but I'll just try to be brief. So one is, I remember the first time I read this poem, I felt there was a certain cumbersomeness about the poem, because the grammar was so exacting, and there was lots of repetition, which I don't always see in David's poems, where you backtrack again and again. And at first I was resisting that until I realized I was having to carry the body of this poem the way they were having to carry the body into the room, that the poem was making me do work, carry weight, resist the gravity of what I would like. Some more contemporary poems might just say, I'll be elliptical, I'll leap from here to here to here. No, he's going to make me carry every hard step to accomplish something here, to bring this woman to still be part of what goes on. And then I thought of the time when I was in Italy and visited an Etruscan tomb, and their tombs look like beds or couches, as if we're still at the party. We're still enjoying the meal together. They're envisioning this is what we're going to have always if we can envision this in our mind. So when we look over and see the woman with that look on her face and we don't understand that look, as if she tasted something delicious, you know, that's what we think about things like the Mona Lisa. Oh, it's a smile of knowing that I don't really understand. I think I respond in some way, but I don't know. And when I got to that point, after reading the poem several times, I thought, oh, she's both feeling the deliciousness of this moment, this banquet that in some ways maybe goes on and on. We like to believe goes on and on, but we don't know. She's knowing that. She's tasting the ashes and drinking the dirt. She already's been there. I've not gotten there yet. She understands what we don't know, what she loves and what she has to lose. And eventually by the end of the poem, the hammer of that last line comes down and I suddenly realize, oh, I understand finally where we've carried this moment. You know, I'm now there too.
Catherine and then Wendy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Catherine?
I'm unmuting.
There you go.
Several things. First, it's very nice to see David in good health and happy birthday. As I was I got as far as the title. I see David always connected on Tuesdays at dinner and at a particular church. So I was prepared for that context, which may not be relevant to other people's reading of it, but it was to mine. And I thought of the line, and I think I have the quotation correctly, "The supper of the heart is when the guest is gone," which is, if you read all of Emily Dickinson's complete works, you'll find that line somewhere. And it seemed to me,
Thank you.
I had a hard time. Somebody quoted it once to me, and it took reading all the way through all of that, and I couldn't find it. And then I thought, no, figure out where she was when she said it. And it took me 2 pages that time, but that time is not this time. And I was poked by that line, and I have to confess I was poked by the fish rather than the meat or the, fish echoes for me a Christian context. And that may be far-fetched, but there it is. And then the ashes is what we do on Ash Wednesday, and yet it's obviously a symbol of cremation. And the dirt is obviously the grave that comes to us all. And reading that made me go back to, by the last few times we saw her, okay, then the rest of it is all before we acknowledge where she is now. And as someone just said, she knows what we hope to know and don't know, and have all kinds of other feelings about whether we ever will know. But there it all is, kind of smushed into the supper of the heart is when the guest is gone.
Wendy, you had your hand up, and then
Yes.
Michael had a question.
Yes. Thank you, Lloyd and David and everyone. This is such a joy to be having this conversation, and happy almost birthday to David. Lloyd, you asked what form this poem is in, and I'd say it's epic. This is David's Aeneid, and the form is remarkably the same. And building on what Steve said about having to make your way through it, parsing all the subtleties of human personality and interaction, and with similar subtlety that I find in David's translation of the Aeneid. And also that discussion of delicious and the ashes and the dirt reminds me of a wonderful essay by Aldous Huxley. It's called Tragedy and the Art of the Real. And he makes the distinction between just undiluted tragedy and the work of authors like David Ferry and Homer, who perceive the art of the real, and that, like Homer, whose men have been slaughtered brutally, and they're weeping and weeping, and then they're hungry and they gorge on dinner. This is the art of the real. This is what life actually is. We weep and we grieve and we eat and we mourn and everything in between. So I just wanted to make those 2 points, and it's a beautiful poem.
Thank you. Yeah. Michael, did you want to ask say anything? I think, there, I kind of, several things about your comment about the epic poem, and I think that there are such large implications and vistas in this poem that just really expand, but that I would start from a kind of a more intimate scale, because I think as a literature teacher, I think of this, first of all, it's you're right about the form of the poem itself, because it's a kind of loose iambic pentameter. So it is in a kind of modern version of a very traditional kind of English poetry, more or less 5 beats to the line, and alluding to, Shakespearean tragedy and epic and so on. But also, I think starting as on a more intimate level, I think of Coleridge's conversation poems, that it's these poems that begin with really rather quietly and intimately, and not beginning as reaching out into kind of the largest issues, which some of those poems do, and which David's poem certainly does, but that it starts as someone, that evening at dinner, that title, and it's someone sort of talking to us about a very intimate experience in this very traditional, or at least this version of a very traditional form for this kind of poem. And that then, as Coleridge does, Wordsworth, it opens out as we're reading it into these large issues that we hadn't exactly expected, although maybe might have. So I just, as a former English teacher, I like to, I do think about, poetry and David's poetry in these larger traditions, and I find it very I find it very illuminating to see this poem in that kind of context. I don't know what, Susan, I'm sorry. Susan and then Michael. Oh, you're muted. Susan, you're muted. There you go.
I just wanted to come back around to the tenderness of the guide through this poem and the extraordinary way he manipulates that knife edge, and so that the hitting the brick wall for me at the last line in a way allowed me to go back and allowed the poet himself to guide me with kind of tender awareness of this knife edge between the brutalities of things as they are and the feelings and the grace that's shown. And the golden section of the poem for me was the bookshelf and the spaces and chasms, and are falling into those inner feelings and richnesses of feelings, and that just simply would stun me, so that I could come back out to the other ways of looking at the universe. But the tenderness, let me see if I can say it better, allowed me, after the brutality of the fact of the last line of ashes and dirt, which we will all end up being, allows us to go back and see the beauty in life, even as we absorb that.
Which Johnson.
You.
Yes.
What? I didn't hear what you said.
I said, which Johnson alludes to.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Right.
I find, by the way, I find it interesting that there are two quotes of the objective world, one about momentum and the other, I don't remember what is it, but, and then
inertia
and sort of almost pseudoscientific or vaguely scientific mentions of things, and that one which is philosophical and of a profound human meaning and expression, the Johnson one. And those are so marvelously, I think, calibrated and put in. At first you say, what's the poem doing in putting these scientific quotations in, which have so little to do with what seems to be the subject? Well, I mean, it's obvious that it does. It's an explanation of certain things in the physical world that the woman and everybody is going through. But I find that interesting that for the final one is left to Johnson. As a quotation, that is, of course.
Yeah. Well, those quotations really do they just open out from this very personal, very intimate experience into the sort of these very large scale, issues of physics and the nature of the world, and open out into the sort of literary world and the world of writing, and seeing the largest vision of the things that we have also been watching very intimately. Michael, what were you gonna? You started to say something before.
Oh well, just a couple of things. The genre. When you asked me, one of the things my mind bumped on in looking for it was it could be a set piece as a portrait of a lady. In a certain sense, it's Jamesian very much, and it's pausing, very generous analysis of interiority versus exteriority, and the moment of embarrassment. It's very awkward socially, and he stays right there with it. The only real figurative language, some might say poetic language of the poem, is the very end, about eating the dirt. And it has that force of throttling almost the whole poem. But the poem in itself would remind you that descriptive poetry, and the empathy of the compassion of trying to feel along with another person who's been exposed like this, is extraordinary. Poetry can go about itself in many, many ways, and it doesn't always have to be figurative, heavy metal, blasting in our ears or whatever. So, and you see in it also David's work with the Latins, with Horace. I was wondering if the quote on the inertia of the body and its movement wasn't from Seneca, from The Nature of Things, but I was trying to guess where that came from. But anyway, the ending, I mean, it's an extraordinary poem, especially the ending, and it was a great, great pleasure to hear Lloyd read it and to see David here today. So that's what I had to say.
I think Daniel.
Daniel, yes, please. And then Linda.
Yes, hi. It's wonderful to be here with everybody today, and thank you, David, for your generosity in being here. I wanted to comment about the laws of weight and inertia, those quotes, that it just seems like a brilliant way to make it sound like the laws of spirit and laws of matter are identical. If weight is the force with which a body is drawn downward to the center of the earth, like to the underworld, and we have the tendency to resist proceeding to that fate, our life force is trying not to go there. It's that tension of looking at the world and being able to see that there is a gap between our experience of it as spirit and its proceedings as matter. I think about that, especially with the image of the Venetian blinds, as something that imposes order, that lets things be seen as they are, but also obscures and introduces separation. So the same as the people who are kept a bit separate while also striving to be together. And it's a kind of baffle, and the word baffle, baffling, bafflement occurs in the poem as like our inability to see everything because of the conditions of our feeling and our understanding. And I think about it also with the ending, delicious, and the produce, that it's like an image of life and matter in a like a more positive kind of cyclical arrangement, where what do I want to say about this? That like matter is proceeding in cycles, but spirit is one directional, and we have to experience that tension and that knowledge even when it isn't visible. And so the speaker of the poem is like striving to appreciate that and live in that, as it kind of, that spirit dimension is superimposed on the physical dimension quietly.
Thank you, Daniel. Linda, and then Bill, and then Stephen.
Thanks, Lloyd. I just wanted to say that my favorite line in the poem is, "She had by force of character and careful management maintained a certain degree of happiness." Because it just seems like that really sums up this woman who is a little bit prim, but she must the favorite of all these friends to go through so much to bring her to this dinner party, and it feels like she is heroic. Having the dinner party and through all our embarrassments is heroic, and we can have books and philosophy, but the society that helps us through it all.
And that she seems happy to be there and loving of these friends whom she's there with.
Yes.
Yeah. Bill.
Oh,
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Lloyd. I wanted to go back to a couple of previous comments. One was made by Mary, who spoke about the repetition of gets, and then I think that was picked up on by Stephen, who talked about the refusal of ellipsis. So get out of the car, or get from the car to the door, and then get across the hall and get across the room to a chair. Those could be expressed much more economically, but by refraining from using ellipsis, the physical difficulty is dramatized. But as a way of extending that point, there seems to be a rather crucial moment later when we are obliged to recognize an ellipsis. At the point where we have at work between herself and us, there was a new principle of social awkwardness and skillfulness required. We've got to read that as elliptical, because otherwise it's a grammatical solecism, because it would be there were X and Y, a new principle of social awkwardness and skillfulness. So it's got to be there was a new principle, and elliptically deleted, there was skillfulness required of each of us. And so that there, the speed with which the other people at the dinner party respond to the social awkwardness with an answering skillfulness is brought to our attention by the ellipsis, especially as it stands in contrast to the refusal of ellipsis on those other occasions. So that was one thing I wanted to pick up on. The other was, I think it was Karen's reference to delicious. I don't know whether I'm misreading this, because I didn't find it as striking and jolting and surprising. And I thought it was another instance in the poem of the kind of interchange between the physical and the mental. Delicious is obviously a physical term, a term pertaining to the senses, and I suppose a gastronomic or gustatory term insofar as we're at a dinner party. But then it's as if she had just tasted something delicious, but what she's really done is found the charm with which other people behave delicious. So the physical term is applied to the mental experience, and then of course it's complicated further because the charm may not actually be real. It may be something of her own invention because she's attributed it to her friends. So in one sense, that's just of a piece with what has been happening elsewhere in the poem. The mental and the physical are being brought into new relationships, and this is a further instance of their being differently configured, as it were. I don't know whether I'm speaking too much, but could I, if David is still here, I can't actually see him on the screen at the moment, but could I, and I don't, this may be a completely impertinent question, which he'll want to brush aside instantly, but I just wonder whether, going back to my original point about the complication and problematization of received ideas about mind and body, whether he had conceptualized a different notion of mind-body relations, because the poem seems to me not easily assimilable to any kind of dualism. At times it seems to be flirting with something a bit more materialistic, a kind of mind-body identity theory or something. I just at times it seems vaguely phenomenological. I just wondered whether he would be willing.
Hi, this is Elizabeth. Hi.
Oh.
Let me see if I can translate that quickly or repeat it as he's having trouble hearing, but
I'm so sorry. Yes.
so give me half a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
Please.
So the question is about mind and body in the poem, the interiority of the poem and the exteriority of the world and the dinner and the woman's body. Do you have a theory of how do you relate to a theory of dualism in relation to that poem? Is that fair?
Yeah, or because it seems to sort of shuttle between a sort of dualism. It refers to both terms, after all, as if they are genuinely picking out real entities. So it seems to that extent as implicitly to subscribe to some kind of latter-day dualism. But on the other hand, every now and again, it seems to be defining one in terms of the other, as if it is flirting with some kind of more monistic theory.
Would you say how does it relate to either dualism or monism?
Yes, that's right.
How do you feel about the relationship between the body and the mind in the poem?
Thank you.
Well, I don't know what to say, because it sounds like a formulation of larger questions, philosophical questions, and so on, that I think are all pertinent, and that we in our every experience are involved in such big issues and so on, and only here it's deliberately so and vividly so. I think in those.
And would you say, Dad, that it is vividly so as a tension or a contradiction in the poem?
Well, I don't think I feel a tension in their being different from one another. But I know when I speak to you, there are large questions of parenthood and the history of the family and the world it's in and it's being spoken of then. In a sense, it just seems to me that too rapid a step into mind, body, so on is.
No, that's fine. I of course, poets don't have to specify exactly where they stand philosophically. I just wondered whether there was lurking behind the poem some particular vision of their relations. But of course, the poem is at liberty to keep its counsel in a sense.
I haven't heard a thing in this discussion that I thought was inappropriate or too small for it or too big for it.
Right. Well, that's the beauty of the poem too, that it's very capacious that way.
Yeah. I had Karen, I wanted to make just a small point, and then Jennifer had an interesting comment, and then you're next in line, okay?
Bert Stern has been desperately trying to get your attention.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's not on my screen.
That's why I put my hand up.
Oh, well, Bert.
is there.
No.
He's been doing that.
Okay, I need someone to tell me that, because I can only see one screen at a time. Bert, hi. You're muted. Can you unmute?
I wanted to make a simple point back to delicious again.
Oh, good.
I think the power of it, and it's the power that has us falling in love with this woman, is that in the midst of this terrible gravity of bodily suffering, the expression on her face is, how shall I say, beatific, and that it's there that we really feel her as a living being, or I feel her as a living being most vividly.
Thank you. Yeah. I just want to make a small point, which kind of reminds me of something that Bill has written about, having to do with ambiguity. Near the end, one of my favorite moments in the poem is the dinner was delicious, fresh greens and reds and yellows. And the way that sort of shift from greens, which I assume means, salad and vegetables, and but then it becomes about colors and becomes something, it's morphing into something, it's getting larger than just dinner. And that I don't entirely understand what it's doing, but I love it. And I just wanted to mention that. And then Jennifer, you had a more a more serious comment to raise.
Do I?
Yeah, it was about. I think you put it in the chat, but it went by very quickly, and it was about. Oh, now I can't remember.
I have two. One I just put in a quote from another poem of David's that I love, which is called Resemblance, because it seemed to go along with points people were making. I can read those lines. It's about the not knowing. That's unable to know is a condition I've lived in all my life, a poverty of imagination about the life of another human being. This is, I think, the case with everyone. And it comes at a moment in the poem where he's just performed, you have to go look up the poem, but an amazing act of imaginative empathy describing somebody else's life. So it's also something I admire, the way the poems acknowledge that we can't know each other, which doesn't mean we have to stop, doesn't mean we can stop trying to know each other. And then maybe to jump to my other comment, it's what I love about those lines about the late marriage. One had the sense of the late marriage as two bafflements inventing the sense they made together, which is so beautiful. And even that assertion is very carefully set forward as, one had the sense of this, and one had the sense of the late marriage as too baffling. The marriage seemed to the outside world, and probably was, radiant and triumphant. You get to entertain this idyll in the poem of a radiant and triumphant marriage by saying you have the sense of it, and it probably is. But I love that. I'll keep that quote, two bafflements inventing the sense they made together, as about the best description I can think of as for love at any age, late marriage or not. So
I agree. That's just a wonderful moment great moment in the poem. Catherine, please.
Yes, I want to go back to a point Jennifer made at the very beginning about the different kinds of language, or the shifts that it begins in language, as you said, plain as water, when you tried to help her get out of the car. And I actually, if I could ask David, why you switched to one had the sense of trips arranged, which
Yeah, hold on. So I think the question is, You switch in the poem to using the word one. One had the sense.
Until then, it's been, that use of the second, but when you tried to help her get out of the, it's I and you and we.
The switch from I and you and we to one.
One had the sense of trips arranged, committees.
Go ahead, Deb.
In our speech to each other, we often speak of my experience and my understanding of, but we do acknowledge that even that they saying it to one another, we're assuming that there's already a common understanding and a common misunderstanding of what we're experiencing. It's when
Fill that in with, of course, earlier in the same stanza. That assumption of common understanding.
I didn't understand.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I was just saying about common, David was just saying about common understanding. I was saying that he builds that in earlier in the stanza in the word, of course. It was as if we both get it.
Right.
But the word once seems to jolt us into a different kind of, I don't know.
Distancing or something.
Distancing, good, thank you, whoever gave me that.
So the word one, she's just remarking that the use of the word one kind of pulls us back away from the scene.
Well, I don't know.
No. Okay.
I just don't know that.
I took it as a kind of, we're going back to we're going back in the past to sort of I don't know, gossip about this late marriage, and that it's not being attributed to any particular person, but the sort of there was the general sense of what was going on.
Kind of like the French on.
Yes, right. And I found that very convincing, and it made me, I mean, without knowing the person, it made me kind of involved in the the chat about the gossip about her.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Gail, you were making a little comment about the discussion today, and maybe do you want to have a last word?
Have what?
You want to have would you like to have a last word?
That's much too big for me.
Oh, no.
No, this is such a great poem. And it's so, I think everything about it is so brilliant. The title is sort of really delivers you to a story about gentility and, lovely, polite, formal occasion among
kindness, and the trying to be kind and challenged by it, and
right. And the speaker is who I assume is the poet, is a beautiful commentator and analysis of the evening, that evening at dinner. He's brought all of himself to bear.
She said that the speaker is a beautiful commentator of that evening at dinner. and has brought all of his observation and analysis to bear. I wonder if I could read some of the chat, which I just noticed, so my father could, before.
Oh, please. Yeah, please.
There's some nice references to other poems, and Michael, and apologize for any pronunciations of names. Michael Steffen, he mentions your poem, A Charm. I have a twin who bears my name. I walk the daylight of his dream. He breathes the air of my nightmare. And Jennifer Clarvo mentions a poem I was also thinking about. Unable to know is a condition I've lived in all my life. I think this is, the case with everyone, which is very much the way that this poem feels too. And a letter of Dickinson's. The supper of the heart is when the guest has gone. I also think of Horace Epistles. And then I did want to read this. This is from Michael Steffen. He says, happy birthday, David. We had a presentation of Donald Hall's poetry Thursday evening in the Cambridge Library, which concluded with the lines Hall had used in one of his poems, quoting from Gilgamesh, and this made me think of you. And
Which concluded, right?
Somebody asks, may we know who she is? Do you want to say who is the lady in the poem?
Who is it?
Yeah.
Who is she?
Yeah.
It's her.
It's Betty McAndrew, right?
John McAndrew was a wonderful teacher in the art department at Wellesley, where I taught in the English department, and we became friends, and so we had a wonderful relationship between us, and that's why we had a special understanding, insofar as an understanding is also a misunderstanding, is of the pain and the beauty of her body's behavior and hers in this evening at dinner.
Dad, can I tell the story about you announcing your engagement to the McAndrews?
Sure.
Because I think it is another evening that maybe gives a. So my parents were good friends with the McAndrews, who were older than they, and when they were both teaching at Wellesley, and when they announced their engagement, they went over to tell them that they were engaged, and they popped a bottle of champagne in joy and took out the Calder mobile that was hanging in the living room. Seemingly displaying it utterly. Tom McAndrew had been the architecture curator at the Museum of Modern Art, I believe, before he was at Wellesley. So he wrote to Calder for instructions on how to put the mobile back together. And I don't know if he mentioned the occasion, and sadly I don't. I wish I could. Oh, he did. Okay. I wish we could find the letter somehow, because the letter was addressed to Dear Professor McArchitecture.
Oh, that's a great story. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elizabeth, for helping so much and making this really possible. David, thank you for writing the poem and for being willing to talk to us about it. And happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Birthday, David.
Happy birthday.
And Marita, thank you so much for being, as always, the perfect host. Thank you for
Yes,
You guys, this was another wonderful program. Thank you. And thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, David. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you.